Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be Tim Thompson, who is the color commentator for Vanderbilt men's basketball. This episode presented by Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House. They turn coffee into water and have a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news is presented by Sutherland and Belk, an SEC sports-loving injury firm in Nashville. These are guys who will shoot you straight on your rights and options when you've been injured in an accident. Call them at 615-846-6200 to get your questions answered. You can visit them online at sbinjurylaw.com. Well, the big news is the subject of today's podcast. Vanderbilt has fired Coach Bryce Drew after 3 years. That'll be the topic of our show. And in baseball better news, the Commodores beat Florida 5-0. Drake Fellows was tremendous. Throws a complete game shutout as the Commodores improve to 2-2 in the Southeastern Conference. Tim Thompson, the color commentator for Vanderbilt basketball, joins me now in light of today's news that the basketball staff has been dismissed. And Tim, I was joking with you, but it's kind of true. I have a few friends that will text me when something might be going down, and they'll just say, I'm checking with you to see if your wife is working and you have the kids for a while today, because I want to know if big news is coming down, because it is sure enough, the minute that my wife works and I'm in charge of the kids is always when news breaks, and that's what happened this morning.
Well, it probably always seems that way when, big news comes down that, you're either, you're in a situation where you're driving in your car or something like that, where you just either have to pull over or, but yeah, today's news was, kind of unexpected. I mean, one of those deals where I just felt like, they lost the last game was Wednesday night in the SEC tournament, and it's Friday. So, everybody was speculating about, okay, well, if it hadn't been announced on Thursday morning and, it's taken this long that, Bryce and the staff was going to be retained for another year and let him have a chance to, try to revive that thing. And it's just one of those deals. I think, Malcolm, made a decision. He's the boss. He's the new AD. He made a decision to pull the plug on the thing, and none of this is ever a happy ending situation, because you're affecting people's professional lives and their families and all the other kind of stuff that goes along with that. So you feel bad about that, but again, I mean, it's one of those deals. As an AD, you're coming in here, and it's like I've said in the past, you can't hide 0-19. That's just such a visual that, people are dealing with, that that's a tough nut to swallow.
Well, and I know like me, I think you feel the same way. When I got the news this morning, and you cover it from my standpoint kind of dispassionately, it's a story, good, bad, and different. But I know that my first reaction is my heart sank for a second when I saw that. And Jeff Goodman is the guy that had the scoop. Just because you know them better than I do, they're really good human beings. And in my business, I just kind of root for good people, kind of no matter where they are. Just from a standpoint of that, I really regretted to see what happened.
Yeah, I mean, again, bad things happening to really good people is not good, and you just hate it. And say what you want to, Bryce and his staff are all great guys, great family guys, and that's the thing that hurts the worst.
Yeah, and on the other hand, it was just getting increasingly hard for me to see this turning around. And I talked about this on Mark Howard's show this morning on the Wake Up Zone, and a little bit on Braden Gall's on 102.5 a little bit too. at the same time, it was kind of hard to see how this ended well in a certain way. And here's what I mean by it. Okay, if you bring him back for next year and you improve a good bit, then it's kind of pointless. Like, what would be the point of getting rid of them before the next year? But at the same time, like if you bring them back and say they go 6-12 in the SEC, your fan base at the same time isn't really convinced that the program is going anywhere. And with people not renewing tickets and things like that, fan interest is something that you have to consider. I just kind of thought like the way that it laid out like that, it just was, you almost felt like they sort of had to make the move.
Well, yeah, it's a situation where, if they would have been brought back another year, my deal is, what's the criteria? I mean, is it 5 wins? Is it 9 wins? Is it 10 wins? Is it going to the NCAA? Is it going to the NIT? Those kind of things. To me, those, if that was the case, then the criteria would have had to have been laid out with some really concrete levels that they have to hit. If it's just, come back for a year and then we'll evaluate it after next year, and they get to, let's just say they got to 9 wins, is that good enough? I don't know. I mean, and again, to me, those concrete, things that you're going to have to get to would have to be laid out. But I just think, you look at the situation, and Malcolm decided that it was time to pull the plug. And again, I mean, I don't think anybody, if the staff would have come back, I don't think anybody would have been really surprised. And on the flip side of that, them getting fired, I don't think there was a lot of people that were surprised, that I just think it was, whatever that mindset is, I don't think it surprised anybody one way or the other.
Yeah. And I like the way you put it better than the way I put it, because if you set goals, then if you set a goal as, say, winning 5 or 6 games in the SEC, again, I don't know what that really proves. And if you set a goal of, hey, you've got to get to the NCAA tournament next year, well, I think everybody knows, barring getting like maybe 2 Reed Travis impact transfer type players or something like that, that's not going to happen. So then it kind of becomes, what's the point, I guess is a good way to say it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And so I don't know. I mean, Malcolm, I think he's a really smart guy. And I think, he's not been in athletics before now, but at the same time, I think he's one of those guys that has been around sports and understands, you're paying coaches a lot of money to win. And if you don't win, there are consequences that come along with it. And I think, that's the business that Bryce and the staff and every other college coach are in. Is it's a business, and it's about winning. And when you don't win, then there are consequences that come from that. And this morning was a consequence of literally not winning, any games in the league.
I guess the first question, and this is almost impossible to answer right now, is what does this do to the roster immediately? I do wonder if you will see kids leave, because you and I both know, say what you want about their performance or whatever, I think the kids on this team love that coaching staff. I think the parents of the kids love that coaching staff. I think that the recruits probably feel the same way. That is kind of my thing is, I wonder, and you never know, because a lot of times kids say, yeah, I'm going to leave. I've had it. And it's in the heat of the moment. And then the next guy comes in and oh, I like this guy too. And they end up staying. But I do wonder, what is your gut feel on the roster impact? Or are you like me, it's just too early to say?
Well, I think it's too early to say right now. When, this happens, when the coaches just find out about it this morning, the players are kind of in the same situation. I'm sure that there was probably some sort of a team meeting. I would imagine, I'm just speculating this, that the coaching staff probably met with the players and, told them what was going on, or, then I would imagine that Malcolm would probably, have a meeting with the players too and explain to them, hey, here's what the process that we're going to, to take to get a new coach. And, I don't want anybody, making any rash decisions. But again, you got to believe there are probably, a player or two that probably would. I think Simi Shittu was probably in a situation where he was going to think about leaving regardless of whether Bryce and them were here or not. I mean, I think he told, Adam Sparks that it was 50-50 that he was coming back. So, again, I think it's too early right now to speculate. And then you've got the recruiting class as well that, is out there. And, you got to be, sympathetic a little bit with them. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, well, the head coach and the assistants that recruited me to come to Vanderbilt are no longer going to be there. Do they have the opportunity to, go somewhere else, which I'm sure they will, or they would, or the new coach that comes in evaluates those guys and said, hey, yeah, they're guys that we want, and tries to maintain that they're still going to come here. So there's a lot of things it's going to have to happen between now and, a new staff coming on board, and how it affects the recruits and how it affects the players that are already here. It's a whole different ballgame now, here over probably the next month or so, that this whole thing's going to transpire.
Well, the question that you asked me is the same one everybody's asking, and I don't think either of us have any answers, but just so the audience can know, I think both of us are pretty confused as to why the timing. I'm not saying there wasn't a reason, but I think that's an area where we're both in the dark.
Well, under normal circumstances and situations like this, I think the normal thing to do is, you look at Greg Byrne at Alabama, and, Avery Johnson, they played North Carolina Central or something the other night in the NIT, and 48 hours after that, boom, the plug is pulled on that thing. So, that's kind of the normal AD mentality. And, I got to tell you, Malcolm, this is his first, foray into the athletic department, environment. And I think he's come from pretty much a business environment, which, sometimes can lend itself to, different ways of making decisions. And I think that's kind of what happened is that decision-making process was probably based on a lot of things. It could be whether it's a buyout, whether, all the legal things that go along with the buyout and everything else. That doesn't happen overnight. That probably is meetings with lawyers and meetings with financial people and all the other things that go along with that. So, now all of a sudden, 48 hours turns into, 8 days or 9 days. And, it's not good for anybody. I mean, it's not good for the coaches and the staffs and their wives and all that kind of stuff. It's not good for the university, but it is what it is. And that's part of being in this business. You got to deal with, situations that when you don't win, you get fired. And that's exactly what happened.
What do you think the perception of this job will be? Because that's another question I've had a hard time answering. I think that the Vanderbilt jobs have been perceived for a while as great jobs because of the city, because they pay well, because of the conference, lots of things. I mean, it is potentially an incredibly good job with all those factors, because Vanderbilt, just by virtue of what it is and where it is, has some things that other schools can't even touch. On the other hand, as well as I know, Tim, Vanderbilt did next to nothing for Bryce. It has increasingly gotten harder to get kids in the way that graduate transfers have become a bigger thing. They can't get those kids in right now. You had the facilities, which were an issue before they got here. They did nothing on that. So on one hand, it's got all those things. On the other hand, I don't see that they did anything for that staff, which I would have to think that coaches talk, and that gets out in the coaching community. When everything is settled and said and done and coaches are looking at this job, how do you think it's perceived right now with all that considered?
Well, I think the Vanderbilt job is potentially a great job. It's in the best city in the South. It's in a Power Five, the best conference, in my opinion, in the nation. You've got an academic institution that when a kid comes here, he's got the ability to graduate, have a great degree, and whether it's a foray into the NBA, or if they're good enough, or it's getting your degree and getting a great job wherever in Nashville or wherever in the United States, it's a great deal. I think what the athletic department has to do now is they've got to reevaluate a little bit. Okay, facilities. That's number one thing right now, I think, is facilities. You're in a situation where if you go around to the rest of the SEC and you look at other people's facilities, whether it doesn't even have to be basketball, but basketball in particular, that our facilities aren't where they need to be if you're going to be highly, highly competitive in this league and in the nation when it comes to, year in and year out, competing for athletes and in recruiting and that kind of stuff. I think they realize that. And then the other thing too is, you made a great point. I mean, I do think this staff was a really good recruiting staff. They really worked hard recruiting and that kind of thing. The problem is it's just not recruiting freshmen anymore. It's now recruiting grad transfers. And, when all of a sudden the graduate school at Vanderbilt has to approve whoever's coming in, to me, I think that if I'm a coach coming in, I think that has to be streamlined. That process needs to be figured out of, okay, it's going to take us, X amount of weeks or X amount of months to get a kid in. In football right now, their season ends in December. They can start working on grad transfers like after the semester, that first semester is over, and they've got January, February, March, April, May, 5 to 6 months to get these kids in. You look at basketball, and basketball just got over with. I mean, really a week ago, and now all of a sudden there's some teams that are still playing, and some of these grad transfers are still playing in the potentially playing in the tournament. And so now all of a sudden you look up and you're at April 1st. So you got April, May, maybe a little bit of June. So you really maybe 2 months that you have a legitimate chance of trying to push grad transfers through. At some schools, that's more than enough time. At Vanderbilt, I don't think that's enough time. And I think that's where you're in a situation where you've got to streamline that process for the next coaching staff coming in. I really do.
Tim, it seems to me like they're not even getting answers before kids have already made decisions. And again, grad school's different, and I understand that Vanderbilt's super competitive. I respect that, but you've got to – I think it's just what you said. I'm kind of being redundant here, but I think that's part of the issue too, is the turnaround time for these kids figuring out where they're going to go is faster than they can even find out if it's an option.
Yeah. Well – again, that's something that I think the athletic department has to figure out with the compliance people and, the people across the lawn at Kirkland and those areas. So anyway, I mean, I just think that thing has to be done.
I'm going to go to the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Do you need home, auto, motorcycle renters, or landlord insurance? Do you need life or commercial insurance? Josh is the guy to contact. Call him 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at jdmintonhq. He's my insurance agent. Give him a try. I think you'll be pleased. Utah Ozzy says, I'd love to hear a couple of names that you think could be home run hires or types of coaches that could be home run hires.
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those deals where, at this point, you start speculating on all these different coaches. Do you go the mid-major route and get a guy that is a mid-major, or do you go and try to hire a Power 5 coach? Or do you go hire a Power 5 assistant coach? Years ago, and Chris, you've been around this long enough, is that, back in the day, all of a sudden Eddie Fogler gets the Wichita State job, assistant coach of Dean Smith, and you got Roy Williams, assistant coach at North Carolina, that gets the Kansas job, and then you've got some Duke assistant coaches that are getting jobs. Over the last few years, you're not seeing that quite as much. You're seeing more mid-major head coaches that are getting jobs and that kind of thing. So it's a tough thing to figure out. I think there are some really quality coaches on the mid-major level. You got Wes Miller at UNC Greenville or Greensboro. You've got, I think, Casey Alexander at Lipscomb is a heck of a coach. At that mid-major level, the guy at Murray State is I think is a solid coach. You have those kind of guys, and then all of a sudden somebody's saying, well, Fred Hoiberg Nebraska's trying to get him. I don't know if that's the right hire. A guy that I thought has really done a really, really good job is the guy at Iowa State, Steve Prohm, who used to be at Murray State. And I think he's from the South. You look at guys like that are at places that, would they make a move? And I don't know. You go to, a Power 5 conference head coach that's at a school, most of the time those coaches are probably not going to move. And I think if they do move, Vanderbilt as an institution better have all their ducks in a row when it comes to, okay, when that guy comes in here and he starts talking about, academic requirements and admissions and facilities and all that, I think you better have the answers ready, because you're going to get those questions from anybody that you're going to recruit as a Power 5 head coach right now. That's just my opinion. If I'm a Power 5 head coach at any institution and I'm being courted by Vanderbilt, I want to know how I'm going to be able to compete in the SEC from a facility standpoint, admissions, grad transfers, all that kind of stuff. And again, I think Vanderbilt in preparation has to be ready to answer those questions in a way that they can get a Power 5 head coach.
Well, let's talk about the coaching backdrop in general, because that determines so much. You may have your eye on a guy, but another school may have their eye on him, or a coach may want a particular job. And let's start with the SEC. The longtime sentiment has been that A&M is going after Buzz Williams, and it seems like most people think you're going to get Buzz Williams at Virginia Tech. Are you hearing anything on that?
Well, I've heard a couple different things. I've heard that if Texas parts ways with Shaka Smart, then all of a sudden it becomes a bidding war for Buzz Williams at Texas and at Texas A&M. They both have enough money, they can pay whatever they want to pay, to a coach like that. So yeah, I've heard those rumors about Buzz Williams to Texas A&M. I've also heard that rumor about, the bidding war that if Texas gets rid of Shaka Smart or Shaka Smart takes another job.
Am I dreaming, or has Steve Prohm's name come up with Alabama?
Somebody told me that he was a basketball manager at Alabama back in the day. I don't know that for a fact, but yeah, I think he's a heck of a coach. I think he's done a great job at Iowa State. So would that surprise me? No, it would not surprise me at all.
What other jobs are you hearing that are either open, and who you think is going where, or other jobs that could come open? Just give us the scoop on just some possibilities at some bigger jobs.
Well, there was somebody, had something come out about, different coaches for Vanderbilt. And when I saw it, I was like, well, Buzz Williams, I don't think he's coming to Vanderbilt. Mick Cronin from Cincinnati, he's not a good fit at Vanderbilt. I don't think Bruce Weber's a guy. Hoiberg, you talk about him. One guy, Ed Cooley at Providence, a guy that has recruited relatively well and has been pretty successful there. But you got somebody said Tad Boyle, Colorado. I don't know. Mike Hopkins at Washington. He's not leaving Washington. He's a West Coast guy or he's Syracuse guy. So, I've heard those kind of names, that kind of stuff, but, I don't know. I mean, it's so early in the process right now that, this is one of the dominoes that have come down along with, probably what's happening with Avery at Alabama.
Well, first thing, Steve Prom's alma mater is Alabama. I just looked that up. So there is a connection there. Second, the names you just mentioned, that came off a tweet from Tom Richardson, the former Vanderbilt assistant. In fact, I actually shared that with you. And I don't know how much there is to it. The reason that piqued my interest, Tim, is because Tom, he knows people. He's friends with some of these guys. So I'm wondering, okay, does he know something we don't know? Is he just throwing something against the wall to have a little fun? But I did ask somebody else. I've got another good source, and I just said, hey, what do you think of this? And the response I got is, because there's a couple of Big East guys on there, was that some of those guys aren't as happy as you might think they are because those programs, I think sometimes the coaches are unhappy that they suffer from a lack of publicity. Now, look, that could vary widely from coach to coach, but it was interesting that when I ran it by somebody who's got some connections in the coaching community, that it wasn't an automatic dismissal of all those names.
Right. Well, again, I'm like I said, it's so early in this whole process that, who do you go after? Do you go after mid-majors? Do you go after the guys like that were on that list? I don't know. I really don't know.
Thad Mott is another one that's going to come up. What's your take on him at this point? I know that his back trouble, I think, forced him out of coaching, but I think he was involved in the Georgia search to some extent. I don't know the details there, but what is your thought on Thad Matta returning to coaching and whether that would be a fit?
I mean, I think he's 52 years old, so he's got some legs left in him. Health wise, I don't know exactly, how he is, but he's a veteran guy that has been successful and he's available and he's out there. I mean, I would imagine that he probably would show some interest in a job like this. But is he the right fit? I mean, is he the right fit at Vanderbilt? I don't know. I mean, I think that there's, I guess Malcolm has hired Korn Ferry as the search committee. So, I'm sure they'll do legwork and all that kind of stuff on that. But, again, I don't know. I mean, I think it's one of those deals where, this is a unique place, and I think you got to get the right guy, and ask the right questions.
Let's see. Harley Hogg asked a question on players transferring out. I think we sort of hit that. So I guess the last one we have is, and I think you've answered this too, just your opinion on the firing, whether you saw it coming. Anything else there that maybe we didn't touch on? I guess I didn't see it coming because I kept thinking that, the longer it kind of drew out, that it was one of those deals where he was going to probably still be retained. But, it's like I said earlier, did it surprise me? No, not really. I just think that it was one of those deals where, when you're being paid a lot of money to, coach team and win games and, you lose, 19 SEC games, that potentially firing is potentially what's going to happen. And the decision was made at the athletic director's level to pull the trigger on it. So I'm friends with people around the program, and I'm friends with ex-players and all that kind of stuff. And I think probably the sentiment was very much like mine, is that, it's, you hate it for the staff, but was it shocking and surprising? It really wasn't, just based on, the losing that went into it. I think too, another thing, and this is a lot of times what does a coach in, it just seemed to me like the former players, and especially a lot of Kevin Stallings guys, just really it seems like Bryce lost them several weeks ago.
Well, yeah, I don't really know that as much. The guys from my era, hell, we're so old. We worry about other things. But again, I mean, when you lose 20 games in a row, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose ex-players. You're going to lose a lot of things. I mean, it's like I've said time and time again. You can't hide 0-19. You just can't. And somebody else, when you're 0-19, somebody else is going to make decisions on what happens to your professional career. Simple. I mean, in my business, however you calculate it, if I'm 0-19, somebody else is going to make a decision whether I'm going to stay or not. And that's basically what happened, is that, with the staff and the team being 0-19, those guys, Bryce and the coaching staff, didn't get to make the decision whether they stay or not. Somebody else gets to make that decision and made that decision. So, again, it is what it is. There's not, I mean, you can't argue with it at 0-19. You just can't.
Well, Tim, I wanted you to be the first to know we are retaining you for the podcast next year if you're still available.
Well, oh gosh. Well, I appreciate it. So I don't know if I deserve it, but anyway, I guess we'll kind of figure out what's going on here in the next 3 to 4 weeks. I'm sure, the search committee and everybody's starting the process. And again, my whole deal is I just hate it for good guys. Like the coaching staff was really, really good people, And that anybody that's listening to this, I was around them a bunch, games and, some practices and travel and that kind of stuff. And they were really good to these kids, and they were good for the university environment. And, I just hate it for them.
Well, and I don't mean to make light of the situation. I think that's a very serious thing. Anytime somebody loses a job, you have families and kids involved. And again, I feel badly for those people today. And from a media standpoint too, I don't know. I guess people cover it differently. I always felt weird about it because I've kind of felt like it's my job, but at the same time, you almost feel like you're a vulture circling over a wounded animal, waiting to see what happens. And that's the part I didn't enjoy either.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just kind of makes everybody feel uncomfortable. If Bryce Drew and that staff were just a bunch of turds, it would have been much easier, to feel like, well, we're just moving on. I just hate it because they're really good Christian guys that, led those players well. And, that's the thing that just bothers me about it. They're just good guys. That's all I can say.
He is Tim Thompson, the color commentator for Vanderbilt basketball. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Tim, thanks for joining us. And you know what? Let's do another one of these in a few weeks when Vanderbilt's got a new head coach.
We'll do it. All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Tim.